And will Superintendent Luna be there, or?
He has been there
This week.
all week in front of the legislature. Tomorrow, I know this is a live program, but tomorrow on the 21st will be that opportunity where the Finance Committee opens up for public testimony. People can come in and they can share their views and their perspectives on what the legislature should be doing.
So they can give input in terms of things that they're concerned about, how maybe they, in terms of priorities, how is that determined? In other words, where the funds go. If they, I think people would support all three of these things, but I know there's discussion about how much a teacher puts out of his own pocket in the classroom, and then some people have some concerns about how much is going to administration and how much is actually going to the teacher in the classroom. Is any of this discussed during this?
Well, absolutely. And as far as public testimony opportunities in front of the Budget Committee are concerned, to address your question, there will be other aspects of perspectives from a teacher, from a parent with a child in school, from administrative perspective, superintendent perspective, business perspective, because we talk a lot about an educated workforce and the ability to, and the infrastructure in Idaho to try to have Idaho jobs for Idahoans. All those perspectives are thoroughly discussed. And as far as priorities are concerned, you touched upon an important issue in the sense that there is a balance between the budgeting process and policy. And when you talk about things like classroom supplies, there are statutory and non-statutory line items in the education budget. And where we get into a little bit of a gray area on those non-statutory items, is it best for that to be addressed through a germane committee driving the policy of education, or is that something that gets done through the budgeting process in JFAC with what's called intent language, which is language that has some dictate as to how those monies are spent if they're particularly non-statutory. So at this point, we've gotten to this point a lot out of necessity because of our budget situation, but subsequently the necessity has led to significant policy changes which will drive the budget. So it's a big circle.
Sure.
I think what the committee is trying to identify tomorrow, Elizabeth, is what's the general public sentiment like? Is the public, and when I say the public, are the taxpayers, are the people who pay the bill for this, are the customers, do they want change? Or do they want business to continue as usual? Are they willing to pay more taxes to keep the system the way that it is?
How do we rank nationally? Does anybody know?
In terms of spending?
In terms of spending, but I'm also talking about results in terms of the number of students that are actually graduating that can even read their graduation certificates. I'm just wondering how the quality of education that Idaho children receive, how do they rank?
I don't know. I can't give you the exact number, but I can tell you, generally speaking, the Idaho school system does pretty well if you compare it on a nationwide basis. But we are in one of those times where we're at a crossroads in how systems function. Idaho has been a victim of the same economy the rest of the nation and the rest of the world in many cases has been. And so now we're at that point where we have to decide, do we continue to do things the way we have for years, or do we take this opportunity to try to change and improve and restructure the existing system?
Well, what about in cost per students or in expenditures? Do we know how we rank in spending?
Absolutely. There are states, and you have to look at things that are more standardized, like standardized testing formats and such, but on that type of as best as you can, apples to apples, there are many states, many of the larger states, East Coast states that spend well over twice what Idaho does per student on an average, and have significantly poorer test results.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because I did some research in 2008, and I found out that in 1998, the total budget of the state was that of what K through 12 was 10 years later in 2008. And I thought, wow, that's pretty significant. And what are we getting for that? I mean, I know some extremely dedicated teachers, which I think many are, probably most are,
Absolutely.
that give money out of their own pocket, as I said, to help the students, you know, have things that they wouldn't otherwise have. But setting that aside for a minute, the quality of education and what the parents expect for their children when they leave school and go on to higher education, how prepared are they? I was just wondering how we were.
Well, let me just share a perspective there, Elizabeth. One of the things that I've learned in being on the Senate Education Committee ever since I've been in the legislature, is that we, the collective we, as our culture, as our society, as our families, we have allowed or even driven in some cases the public school system to do things it was never designed to do. And through, I won't say any one specific stakeholder's fault, what's happened is we are now asking schools to do things other than the classic read, write, arithmetic. I mean, it's, in many cases, the schools are expected to do the discipline. They're expected to train health-related issues in hygiene. They're expected to teach students physical education, and in many ways, if I dare say, raise our kids. That was never the intent of the existing public school system. And so this whole situation has grown so large that now less than half of all the public school employees that we have teach.
Well, and I know from years that I substituted in the system that you were talking about discipline. There are also teachers who are concerned about discipline who feel that they can't discipline. And so that, I know, leaves a problem too. If you've got a problem student that takes more of your time and takes away from the rest of the student, that's something that always has been and probably always will be. Those things come up. Let's talk a little bit about charter schools and how they're doing, because that seems to be, there's controversy over whether they're putting private schools out of business, and then there are people who, especially the parents who have written the charters. I know Thomas Jefferson School over in Caldwell, I've talked to many of the parents who are so happy with what they're getting there. Can we talk a moment about charter schools and how they work?
Well, charter schools is one of the public school options in the overall school option menu that we have now in the state. And I think you can gauge their success to a large extent by the waiting lists that are queued up for charter school use, and the fact that there are always continued proposals for new charters to be formed. But basically it's a public school option that can specialize in certain areas. And so we have medical charters, which tends to focus a little bit more on the medical side. We have arts charters, which tends to focus more on arts. We have technology charters, which tends to focus more on technology. And it gives parents, families, students options to potentially, go and focus in areas that they may not be able to focus in a traditional public school system.
So it's